Hi, Josh.
Hey there, Brink. How are you today?
I'm good. Yourself?
I could be worse. Of course, that's always true.
Absolutely.
Not bad. Not bad.
Well, let's dive right in and start off with the number one news story of the week: the liberation of Paris.
Yeah.
Paris Hilton, that is.
Paris out of prison.
She's out of the pokey. I'm sure everybody's very excited about this. Long national ordeal is over.
Yeah.
So tell me, where do you stand on Paris? Don't think about her at all. Can't stand her. Guilty pleasure.
No guilty pleasure. Not at all that I can't stand her. I don't really have a big attitude about her. She holds no fascination for me. She might be a nice person for all I know.
Right.
I don't know. You have some fascination.
No, she's a guilty pleasure for me. Although not when she's talking at any length. I watched a little bit of the Larry King interview last night, and that was boring. But she poses well and smiles well, and there's something. There's clearly something about her, right? This person who had no resume became incredible, except for her last name. And the fact that she showed up at the right parties, that turned her into this mega celebrity. So there's clearly some sort of mega Q rating where people like to look at her. And I would have to say, even compared to people I consider much more attractive, there's just something about her that just holds your eye. And I don't know what that means. I would say, generally, I'll have to confess that I'm a regular consumer of trash culture.
You are, yeah. No, so am I. I'm a pretty big consumer of trash culture, although that's why I say she in particular just never held any fascination. I didn't watch the Larry King interview, and it wasn't that this required a heroic act of resistance on my part, because I'm pretty much incapable of resisting temptations. I just didn't feel any.
Okay, so
But I got a question for you.
Yes.
So she says she's a changed person. Does that make you feel bad?
Yeah.
Do you hope she's not a changed person?
I'm banking on the fact that it's not true. But maybe it is. I mean, part of the appeal of folks like this is their ephemeral nature. So somebody else will come along, and her time will be past.
That's certainly true. And I mean, I don't have a personal fascination with her. I don't have a big attitude. I don't think she's awful, and I don't regard it as a sign of some, great cultural depravity that there is so much fascination.
Yeah, a lot is made about that she's something new, that she's that in her fame for nothing other than being famous, that she's somehow or another new type. But I remember the Gabor sisters, and
I don't believe that for a second.
Yeah.
That she's something new.
And in fact, I was very happy when I saw that one of the claimants to be Anna Nicole's baby daddy was Zsa Zsa Gabor's current and umpteenth husband. That to me, that seemed to sort of close ranks between the generations of fluff trash celebrities in a pleasing way.
Yeah. Well, I hope there are a few other things to pay attention to, and I think it would be nice if people paid attention to some of those things, but they sort of do, and I think it's fine. I'm not a...
That's my big beef with the kind of puritanical hand-wringing about trash culture is the assumption that it's either or, that if you're watching that stuff, you're not doing anything else of any value. Whereas, I think you can do that and other things. And clearly, if you spend all your time watching reality TV and the E! Channel, you don't have a very rich and fulfilling life. But so I think of Paris as kind of like human cotton candy. She's fluff with no nutritive value, but yummy. So
well, everything up till the yummy was okay. I mean, as I say, I don't have any big attitude one way or the other about her. But I agree with you. There are two kinds of things that I don't like. One is the idea that if you pay any attention to this, it shows that there's something wrong with you, and the other is this thought that things used to be better.
Right.
And this is part of some general, we're all going to hell in a handbasket cultural degeneration. That there's this. a kind of an attachment to vicariousness or something. I'm sure this is a permanent feature of the human landscape, and this is just its latest manifestation. No better, no worse.
Yes, and since I'll make my shameless book plug. Since I just wrote a book about sort of cultural optimism, then I can't. Then I'm heartened by the fact that you don't buy into the everything's going to hell theory.
No, I distinguish between hopefulness and optimism, and I'm hopeful. It's I don't believe in it's what Gramsci distinguished between optimism of the head and optimism of the heart.
Yes.
Or it's okay to be optimistic of the will and pessimistic of the intellect, and that's I'm hopeful. But optimism is the view that you think things are going to get better. Hopefulness is the view that you think that through reasonably decent, conscientious efforts by sensible people, those efforts make sense because they might improve things some. I'm hopeful in that way.
Yes, and there's one of my favorite quotes is a Horace Walpole quote that I think is apposite in these kind of situations, which is that the world is a tragedy to those who feel and a comedy to those who think. And there's of course an appropriate time to be outraged about the world, but sometimes it's fine just to have a little ironic detachment and enjoy the human comedy.
It may be that we can't get onto this subject, but outraged about the world. I have to say that the Supreme Court's decision this morning that it's impermissible to use race as a factor in efforts to produce a more racially integrated society, I think is just an absolute outrage. And Justice Breyer, I think, very powerfully did read one report on this. Justice Breyer very powerfully expressed the outrage at the Chief Justice, the Chief Justice compared students in Seattle who weren't getting their first choice in a school placement program with the students, with black students prior to Brown v. Board of Education, and Justice Breyer just said that this was just absolutely outrageous that he would make this comparison. I think this is a really, really a dark, terrible decision. But the decision was only taken an hour ago, and it may...
You've got the advantage of me. I'll say, generally, I'm sure that I as a general matter, am much less of a fan of race-conscious remedies than you might be. But this case I haven't looked at, so I can't comment on it. But
we'll stay away from it.
While we're talking about the Paris Hilton generation, why don't we talk about kids these days? And you wanted to bring up this recent New York Times poll about the leftward shift in young people's political opinions. So why don't you tell me what it was that caught your eye?
Yeah, there were a few things that I thought were pretty interesting. This was reported, I think it was 2 days ago in the Times. I can't remember. This was an opinion report on 17 to 29-year-olds, right. And it more or less echoed a report that was out about 6 months ago from Pew.
Yes.
Though the Pew focused on the Gen Next 17 to 25-year-olds. And there were a few things that I thought were pretty striking. First, very strong shift in a pro-gay marriage direction.
Yes.
And I should add, I thought very interestingly, that in the 17 to 25-year-old group, there was a strong shift in the pro-gay marriage direction, but it went along with the view that a much more strong view to the effect that sexual orientation is a matter of choice. And so there's been the view that you get from people like Andrew Sullivan, which is that sexual orientation is a matter of nature, not a matter of choice, and that's why it should be respected. And I've never really liked the Andrew Sullivan view, and I'm with the 17 to 25-year-olds on this one. So strong shift in pro-gay marriage, not just civil unions, but marriage. Very pro-immigrant, much stronger responses on the immigrant questions. These are not, delicate and discerning questions on policy choices, but just a general attitude toward the contribution that immigrants make in the society. Very, very strong in the younger group. Also, very favorably disposed to some kind of national health insurance system, to a significant reform in current health care, but in particular to some kind of single-payer or national health insurance system. Very strongly self-identified, distinct from the rest of the population, as liberals, very strongly identified with the Democrats. The Democrats, this I think was in the Pew poll, Democrats come out 20 points stronger on the favorability side, and also 20 points stronger on the negative side. That is, the Republicans have 20% more of the, these were the 17 to 29-year-olds, have a negative view of the Republicans. Also, on this optimism issue, there was a question about whether or not you think you can have some effectiveness in bringing about social change, and the younger group, this is now the 17 to 25-year-olds in particular, had a very strong sense of optimism about that. I thought that was very good. In the Pew poll, something that I thought was really quite interesting was that the 17 to 29-year-old group is both pro-regulation and pro-business, not anti-business. Right. So their model company may be more like a Google or a Netscape. Yes. So they don't think business is a bad thing, but they also are more favorably disposed to regulation. No, strangely, a little bit more optimistic on a favorable outcome on Iraq. Very high positives, but also really high negatives on Hillary Clinton. 40% positive, but also 40% negative. And then, in a way, the question that I thought was particularly interesting in light of things that were said after the 2004 election, when they asked, do you think of the Democrats or the Republicans as sharing your moral values? Yes. 52% said that they thought of the Democrats as sharing their moral values, and the Republicans were someplace in the 30s. So I felt on the whole, other than the slightly weird, strange, but only very slightly greater optimism on Iraq, on a favorable outcome in Iraq, this all looked pretty good to me.
No, I'm sure it does, and nothing there is too surprising to me. I figure, the group of folks whose main news source is The Daily Show and The Colbert Report, and who've just lived through, whose main political awareness has been the Bush years, and watching this administration just go down the drain, then I just can't imagine. I would be shocked if there hadn't been a big shift towards Democrats away from conservatives. So the partisan shift strikes me as just completely unsurprising. On the universal health care support, you can take that on one side, and then you can look at the Pew report for the overwhelming support for Social Security privatization, and I think you get kind of a role of government wash there. And I know that we at Cato, had all kinds of poll data showing just about every demographic group you could think of, except senior citizens, supporting Social Security privatization. And then, once it actually went into the policy-making meat grinder, things didn't turn out that way. So I remain skeptical about the meaning of broad public support for single-payer once the meat grinder starts. I think the most meaningful shifts aren't the opinions about public policy, whether it's Iraq or healthcare or Social Security. The most meaningful ones are the ones that indicate values, because that's what they really know about. They know what they feel. They may not know what the best public policies are. And particularly the rapidly changing attitudes on gay marriage and on immigration, and then there's, I think it was in the Pew report, just a big upsurge in sort of secular, no religious affiliation.
Yes.
All of that, I think, speaks to the real crisis for social conservatism. And actually, I just in the still current issue of National Review, I have a longish piece that's entitled "Farewell to Culture Wars," and it starts off with the decision by the Disney company to allow gay marriages at its theme parks, and the bottom line then of this little vignette is that the culture wars are over and capitalism won. That anti-corporate lefties they can't be thrilled at the idea of incredibly expensive kitsch fests at the ground zero of consumerism. On the other hand, social traditionalists have to be tearing their hair out at the prospect of a company once identified with family values siding with a gay agenda. So I use that as my setup for arguing that basically the thesis in my book, which is the whole red versus blue thing, is now resolving into a purplish libertarianish kind of centrism. And in particular, I offered at the end some friendly advice to conservatives and said that it was my bet that in 20 years' time, if not less, that the current right-wing panics over Mexican immigration and gay marriage were going to look just as goofy as the old fulminations against satanic rock and roll, and these polled numbers, show that that's coming sooner rather than later.
Yeah, I'm generally, I'm generally sympathetic, not sympathetic. I'm generally in agreement with that. Although I'm not so sure that, and on the purplishness rather than the red-blue, I think is probably right. My colleague Mo Fiorina here has been arguing for some time that the culture wars stuff is very much exaggerated, and that it really is a phenomenon of elite politics rather than mass politics. And if you look down the list of political issues, what you find is that there's much broader agreement in the mass public than the culture wars arguments would suggest, and in particular that to the extent that there is disagreement, that doesn't match up into a kind of red state versus blue state. I think it's for reasons that we've reached back in our conversations. I think to say that either that the culture wars are over and that capitalism won, or that it's a purple state libertarianism. Those may be a little bit tendentious, although maybe if you unpack what you mean by purple state libertarianism, it wouldn't seem so tendentious. I mean, if you mean social libertarianism as opposed to social conservatism, that I think is probably right. And the numbers for the 17 to 25 group in particular, and 17 to 29 more generally, strongly support the view that the future direction of the population is going to be on social issues in a libertarian direction. I was struck, you mentioned the religiosity issue. One of the big differences between the Gen X and the Gen Next is whether or not they saw an importance in having greater spirituality in their life. The Gen Next, no big deal. But for the 17 to 29-year-old group generally, what I was struck by was the fact that there are almost as many people who are self-identified as atheist or non-religious as there are Catholics. So it's about 22% Catholic in the country and about 20% who are self-identified as either atheist or non-religious. And that's for the United States, I mean, maybe for the rest of the world, that's not a big deal. The rest of the developed world, that's not a big deal. But for the United States, that's a pretty striking change.
No, I agree. So, the only way I can get away with saying that the culture overall is moving in a libertarian direction is to take a very loose definition of libertarianism. And what I mean basically is, pro-capitalism, pro-basic middle-class values of family and work ethic and personal responsibility, as opposed to what you might take as the poll numbers you would have gotten from polling college students and young adults in the 60s and early 70s. But at the same time, just dramatically more liberal attitudes about race and sex, and more secularism, and less in-group, out-group distinctions on immigrants and gays. So
I think the tricky thing on the comparison with the late 60s and 70s is I suspect that if you polled the 18 to 25 group in 1970, I would have been in that group then, that there wouldn't have been such large differences on some of the what were then perceived as the social issues. On sexual orientation, I'm sure there's been a big move. But there would have been the 18 to 25-year-old group then, I assume, would have been pretty strongly culturally liberal.
No, that's right. That's right. But I think they would have been, much more anti-business and much more anti-worldly success as a motivation. In the Pew numbers, you ask the Gen Nexters, what are your generation's most important goals in life? Getting rich is number one at 81%. Getting famous is number two with 51%. That's a long way from Woodstock Nation.
Yeah, those are big differences. For me, the interesting question, and this goes back to another interesting question, and this goes back to this national health insurance thing, is if you got away from the policy side and you talked about the importance of socioeconomic equality, fairness.
Yep.
My guess is that the policy preferences in 1970 versus 2007 would have looked very different. But my guess is that my sense is that there's a pretty strong movement in the direction of concern about the huge expansion of inequality in the country and a willingness to consider measures to do something about that, and less compared to, say, 15 years ago, less of a kind of knee-jerk assumption that if you make any effort to do anything about that, you're just going to make things worse. I think there's probably, this is what I took from the stuff about social change, probably a little bit less of the sense that if you're smart, then you're supposed to be cynical.
Right.
And that's why I think I suspect that some of the support, some of the statement that about being liberals, some of the stuff about support for Democrats comes from a willingness to think that efforts to remedy important social problems ranging from the health care issue to the growth in inequality in the country, that efforts to do that aren't through the use of law and public policy aren't doomed to failure and doomed to perverse effects of just making things worse.
Yeah, I think it's we'll see. It's at least possible that there has been an egalitarian shift or a shift towards more egalitarian policies in light of the changes in the economy and the statistics on increasing economic inequality. That's a huge issue to dive into, and maybe we can tangle with that in depth at one of these points. My guess is I think there's rather less to those numbers than meets the eye. I'm not saying that there's nothing there. I think there are important things going on there, but not quite the horror story that some of the numbers seem to indicate. Furthermore, it seems to me that a pretty stable feature of American political culture is an ethic of personal responsibility. Compared to Europeans, say, it's very high percentages of Americans think that your socioeconomic status is largely up to you. They may be wrong about that, but that's what they think, and so. I think the inequality stats tend to get left-leaning intellectuals much more up in arms than they do Joe median voter. But it could be that the younger folks are different, and they've grown up in this time, and they may be reacting to things differently. But one bit of sort of counter evidence is that even if there is this clear shift in the public opinion polls towards generic preference for Democrats over Republicans and for liberalism in the abstract over conservatism in the abstract, it doesn't look like actually existing liberal politicians are doing that well in the polls these days. In particular, we've got these new poll numbers showing that the Democratic Congress is polling lower than Bush, something like 25% approval rating. So what do you make of that?
Yeah, they're approaching Putin levels past. They've gone past Bush, and first thing is that they're not polling well. Congress isn't polling well in anybody's polls. There was one poll in particular, I think it was an LA Times poll, that said, worst in 10 years. And that's, everybody isn't getting the same result there.
No.
But it's not too good. The point remains that the Congress is not polling too well. One of the things that's interesting, though, is if you ask people what their views are about Democrats in Congress versus Republicans in Congress, the Democrats in Congress are doing much better than the Republicans in Congress. Democrats in Congress, I think the Congress itself was polling at about 25% favorable. I think Democrats in Congress were polling into the 40s. It may have been that they were, it was 45 negative and 40 positive, or 42 positive and 47 negative. But the numbers, the favorability for Democrats in Congress was above Congress as a whole, and the negatives for Republicans in Congress was much higher. So I think that modifies a little bit the judgment that there's a kind of openness. There's a kind of, as you put it, a kind of generic liberalism or a generic Democratic Party support, but that it doesn't translate into actually existing politicians. That's one piece of it. I suspect also, and now I'm going from the actual numbers on disaggregated between Democrats and Republicans more into the land of speculation, but my guess is that there are probably a bunch of people out there who've lost their taste for divided government. Mm-hmm. And if you ask people who don't think Congress is doing so well, what do they think would help to make Congress do better? One view might be, I don't know how strong it is, but we'll find out in 2008. One view might be, it really would be better to make Congress more functional if there were a Democratic president and a larger Democratic majority in Congress. There may be, I don't know. As I say, I'm speculating there. The numbers in the 18 to 25s, though, as I say, the Hillary numbers positives are very high, the negatives are very high. The Barack Obama positives are very high, the negatives are not very high.
Correct.
Edwards, positives high, negatives not nearly as high. I mean, Hillary Clinton's negatives are running very high. So I didn't think that there was a generic dislike for or mistrust for Democratic politicians. I was more inclined to think that the Congress numbers were very reasonable. Nothing much good happening in Congress, not on Iraq, not on the immigration stuff. It's kind of a logjam there, but that's a logjam that could be broken in a bunch of different ways.
Yeah, I'll go along with that to a significant degree. I'd be shocked if Republicans weren't more unpopular than Democrats these days. I'm just surprised at how little of a honeymoon the Congress got, given that there's new blood in charge. Just to look at the numbers, I think the most recent Newsweek poll is 25% approval and 63% disapproval. Gallup was a week before, 24% approval, 71% disapproval. That doesn't give the breakdown, though, of Democrats and Republicans. And what you say sounds quite plausible to me. And there's polling data showing that Americans are in a pretty lousy mood about just a whole host of things right now.
Absolutely, So if you ask about the state of the nation, the Congress is, you might say, basking in the reflected inglory of the nation as a whole. These questions about, is the country moving in the wrong direction? Is the state of the nation good or bad? I mean, those numbers are running pretty badly.
Yeah, they're and all the do you trust these guys? Do you trust these guys? All the trust numbers are in the toilet right now too. And I think it just has to be, first and foremost Iraq. That's just got everybody in a really sour mood. We're in this quagmire. There's no apparent exit. There's no political solution in sight, since we've got the two branches of government at loggerheads. So it's I think that's just got everybody's teeth on edge.
Yeah, I don't. I agree. As you know, I agree completely about that. And Congress, for a complicated set of reasons, has been really unable to do anything about that. And if you look at that, and again, the immigration issue that maybe we'll get to, there's no forward movement. But I think there's a very large question, which is, where is the blame going to fall on the Iraq issue? And I think that of course the test will be in the 2008 election. But judging by how Republicans are polling and how the liberal conservative difference is polling now, it just doesn't look to me as if it doesn't look to me as if you can read off from the negatives on Congress to some negatives on government, on regulation, on actually existing Democrats. It's
it's absolutely incontestable that Democrats are going into 2008 with very favorable terrain, right? That if they can pluck defeat from the jaws of victory this time, that will be a truly stupendous accomplishment. They've done it before.
They've done it before, and and it's just possible that Michael Bloomberg will help them in that effort if he decides to jump in with his $80 gazillion. He may shake up the terrain sufficiently much, pull a bunch of that. That could make the difference. Although my guess is that he. What do I know? As you know, nothing. But I don't think he's going to get in because this is not a guy who wants to make a point. He wants to win an election, and the chances of him winning the election, even with $80 gazillion, are not that high. Moreover, I think he probably not only wants to win an election, but he'd like to be able to govern after he wins an election. And the idea that he's going to be able to govern having pissed off a lot of people who he agrees with, should he happen to get elected, that doesn't seem all that likely.
No, I think, I agree with you that it's very unlikely that he'll get in because I don't see any point in it, and he seems like he's got to be a pretty smart guy to have accomplished what he's accomplished in life, and I just don't know why he would do something so kind of foolhardy. If he did get in, what the effect would be, I think is anyone's guess. On the one hand, my sense is that the type of people who would be attracted to voting for him might be more likely to, he's, I think, pretty much of a liberal Democrat. So I would think that he'd appeal more to liberal Democrats than he would to Republicans. On the other hand, if he did run, it could be that he devoted most of his attack ad fire to Republicans because I think it's more likely that they would be saying things that would tick him off, and so he could depress turnout there. Who knows? But then you're fantasizing now about unified government under Democratic control, and well, that could happen, but be careful what you wish for. The last time it happened, we had the lowest trust in government polling numbers in recorded history, and we got the earthquake of 1994. So, we'll see.
Right. No, in a perfect world, anything can happen. But I guess I think that maybe this is, the triumph of hope over rational belief here. But I do sort of think that the current disaster of the Republican administration, ranging from Katrina to Iraq to, the list goes on, I just feel like it has to have discredited a certain, view about government and a political project. It's not just discredited Bush. I think when people say that, when the 18 to 25s, or 17 to 25s, 18 to 29s, when they say that when they self-identify as liberals and when they self-identify in increasing numbers as Democrats, I don't. It's not just negatives on Bush. As I say, maybe this is just my hoping that this is true. No, but I think there's a view that about the role of government and just a general cynicism about politics, which has helped to fuel the Republican dominance that I don't see in those numbers in either the 17 to 25s or in the 18 to 29s. And I think that could produce unified a democratic government. And if you get a unified democratic government, and improbably enough, they do something in the first 100 days on the health care issue, I think that could have a large impact on people's views about whether Congress is good for anything and whether institutions can be trusted. But anyway, now I'm just this is wild speculation guided by hope.
I think that to the extent there's any hope for learning in politics, for just not repeating the same old mistakes, but actually kind of moving the ball forward, you have to have accountability. If one side screws up, it needs to. It needs to be bounced out. It needs to reflect on what it did wrong and come back with something new. And I think that the Democratic Party was improved by its wilderness years in the 80s, and I think the Republicans, not just George Bush, but the Republicans in Congress as well, have just made a botch of things. They've not followed through with in accordance with their highest principles. They've just been subject to all kinds of corruption, and I mean that in the sort of broader sense rather than the pecuniary sense, although that's gone on as well. And I think, I'm not of the opinion that Democrats have really sort of deserved a turn at the wheel, but I think Republicans have richly deserved getting bounced. And so it may be that the best thing is for an accountability moment, as Bush calls it, and for a transfer of control over to the Dems and see what kind of botch they make of things and see what lessons Republicans learn from this. And so that it could be that's regardless of my own sort of lack of enthusiasm for the Democrats' public policy program in the domestic sphere, it still could be that's the only sort of constructive
just one last
forward.
point on this, which is you have an accountability. You have an accountability moment. You let the Democrats come back and try something new. What I hope is that you don't have the Democrats coming back with Hillary Clinton being elected, because Hillary Clinton will try something old.
Yes.
I think that's the nature of her political sensibility at this point, is that she came to political maturity at a time where being a smart Democrat meant looking and sounding as much like a Republican as you can. And I think there's still a strong measure of that in her, and that's where I think someone who's really offers something distinctive, whether it's an Obama or I know you don't like Edwards, but I think also an Edwards shows much more promise than somebody who's going to come in being overwhelmed from day one by high negatives and by caution. But this is ground we've been over before. Ground we haven't been over before is about this is a segue, if that's okay.
Yes.
I mentioned Bloomberg coming in with $80 gazillion, and the Supreme Court, in its infinite wisdom and its infinite capacity for what I regard as horrible decisions, made one on campaign finance earlier in the week. I know Cato had an amicus brief.
Yes, we did.
On what I'll tendentiously describe as the wrong side of this decision.
The winning side of this decision. Yes.
In fairness, Cato's amicus brief was joined by an amicus brief from the ACLU on the same side, also the AFL-CIO on the same side. So you had a broad spectrum
progressive company,
very impressive company.
The free speech crowd.
The free speech crowd, that's one way to describe it. Another way to describe it is the people who don't care that much about political equality. I think, but we should, our job is...
We'll talk specifically about the opinion, and then we can branch out into the abyss of our philosophical differences later.
Yeah. The opinion. So... This was this Wisconsin right to life, and raising a challenge to a provision of McCain-Feingold.
Yep.
And you have a law degree. I only teach at a law school. I don't have a law degree, so if I get something wrong, keep me in line here. So one of the provisions of McCain-Feingold said that corporations can't use revenue from general revenues from their treasury. They can't use revenues from their treasury
right.
for what was described in McCain-Feingold as electioneering.
Yes.
Essentially, you can't, say, a month before the Democratic primary in Wisconsin, you can't be running political advertisements that say that are critical of Senator Feingold, even if those critical advertisements don't say vote against Senator Feingold. So in the case at issue, Wisconsin Right to Life had a very strong view against the use of filibuster in judicial appointments.
Yep.
And Senator Feingold was a filibusterer on judicial appointments.
Yep.
And Wisconsin Right to Life was opposed to Feingold. They didn't like the filibuster, and so they were running a bunch of advertisements in the run-up to the election, to the primary, which were critical of Feingold's support for the use of the filibuster. But doing that in the month preceding the primary, or as I recall, in the 2 months, according to McCain-Feingold, in the 2 months preceding the general election,
yeah.
was electioneering. And you could do that if you had a segregated fund, a PAC, but you couldn't take monies from the corporate treasury and use those for electioneering purposes. And the court had previously upheld McCain-Feingold, and they came back this time, and the details get a little complicated,
yep.
the legal details, but basically what they said is that the use of McCain-Feingold to prevent political advertising of this kind was an unconstitutional abridgment of freedom of speech, and that essentially they said the only thing that you could regulate companies spending their money on, the only thing that you could regulate were very explicit express advocacy where you say vote for
right.
Feingold's opponent or vote against Feingold. So there was a very narrow set of political ads that could be regulated, but most stuff couldn't be regulated. I think that's a...
Yeah, so I am indeed a recovering lawyer, but I am not now and never have been an election lawyer, and that is a maze of intricacies that is way above my level of expertise. But my general understanding is going back 100 years, we've had this ban on corporations and unions contributing directly to candidates.
Right.
But then that meant that they could fund issue ads, and so the question is, where's the dividing line between issue ads and supporting candidates? And I think pre-McCain-Feingold, and I believe this is from Buckley v. Vallejo in the 70s. That there were certain magic words
That's correct.
that if you said those magic words, that was electioneering, and if you didn't, you were fine. And so McCain-Feingold comes in with this advocacy standard, which was very loose. That is, not caring very much about infringing on free speech, and opting to err on the side of curtailing speech rather than allowing corporate money to pollute the election process. And the Roberts court has now, I think, moved the ball back somewhere between where it was in the old days and where it was under McCain-Feingold. That is, something maybe a little, at least a vaguer, and therefore with more of a chilling effect than the old magic word standard, but certainly not the full Monty of the McCain-Feingold restrictions. And in this particular case, that I say, well done. A group of folks who have views on abortion, and there's a candidate who has different views or different views that pertain to their core interest, because it has to do with appointing judges. They express their views, and that just seems to me just smack dab core political speech, and the First Amendment means what it says, and so I'm in this particular case, I could imagine that there might be cases where things might get fuzzier, but in this particular case, I'm a strong supporter of what the court did.
Yeah, the case is a little. The details of the case are a little bit more complicated. Most of the because there was no restrictions on establishing a segregated fund, setting up a separate PAC. Wisconsin Right to Life is a non-profit corporation, incorporated. Most of the general revenues, most of the treasury funds that Wisconsin Right to Life has come from companies. At least this was the FEC, the Federal Election Commission assertion, which the court was not prepared to challenge.
Yes.
The Federal Election Commission asserted that most of the revenues that were being spent did come from,
or at least some of them, and some is enough, I think.
Yeah, so it's a bunch of that's right, but a considerable proportion of them did, and what the court said was that it counts as an issue ad so long as they didn't adopt. You're right that they didn't go back to the magic word standard, which is what Justice Scalia urged that they do.
Yeah.
What they said was that it counts as an issue ad so long as some reasonable observer could regard it as an issue ad. But I think there is a big. I think the big issue here is considerations about freedom of speech, unregulated political speech are, absolutely fundamental. Considerations about political equality, in one word, democracy, are also really fundamental. And the tricky issue in this area, and it's a really hard issue. I don't want to make light of it at all. The really hard issue, I think, here is to try to accommodate both the importance of unregulated speech, people being able to speak particularly maybe on political issues and say what's on their mind, and wide open, robust, uninhibited debate, and at the same time to ensure that you have that all citizens in the democracy have a fair chance to get their voices heard. And trying to do both of those things is not pretty hard.
Yeah.
It's really hard. What I don't like is the idea, and this is the position that the court took in Buckley, and it's reiterated here, but it's really was set in motion by Buckley. What I don't like is the view that says that the concerns about political equality, about some kind of equal opportunity, equal chances for political influence, equal chances to get your voice heard, the idea that isn't a fundamental constitutional value, which I think is what the Buckley tradition stands for, I think is really, really a misguided understanding of the nature of of a constitutional democracy.
Well, here I think we have fairly fundamental disagreements because I don't think this is a very hard issue. Yes, we should have laws against bribery and direct corruption of government officials. But beyond that, to me, the quest for a kind of absolute equality of influence over the political process is utterly quixotic. I mean, we live in a country where 60% turnout is good turnout. So already you've got 40% of the people who just don't care enough to go to the polls. Beyond that, you've got inequality of articulateness and inequality of charisma and inequality of demagogic skills. There is no possibility of equality of influence over the political process, and by singling out money as some kind of uniquely corrupting force, as opposed to the talent for demagogy, is I think just an unbalanced view of things, and is likely to have perverse consequences because you don't make a more equal political setting. You just increase the relative advantages of other kinds of influence, and so a world where where the role of money is suppressed is a world where the role of owning a newspaper or having an incredibly high Q rating and speaking skills is advantaged all the more. So, to me, it's a hopeless quest what you're looking for.
Well, what you described, I agree with you, is a hopeless quest, but it wasn't what I said. Now, as you know from other settings, there's a very big difference. Some people might say all the difference in the world between promoting equal outcomes and promoting equal opportunity. I didn't say there should be equal political influence. That's quixotic and would be a disaster. What I was talking about was equal opportunity for political influence. In particular, the people's chances. I mean, some people aren't interested in politics. Some people aren't interested in becoming lawyers,
right.
But equal opportunity still has some significance there. Equal employment opportunity is important. It doesn't mean that everybody gets the same job. What I'm talking about is that the principle of equal opportunity, an equal opportunity requirement, should apply not just to the labor market, but to what I think in a democracy is the much more important setting of chances to get your voice heard and have some influence on the fundamental decisions about the future course of the society. So what the court has said since 76...
So we have McCain-Feingold. Where's the equal opportunity between a pro-life guy in Wisconsin and the editorial board of the Washington Post? Where's the equal opportunity to influence public opinion there? They're just... I think you're trying to get out of the quixotic problem by shifting from outcomes to opportunity, but I don't get that the distinction gets you very far.
Yeah, well, and here again, I think there are two ways in which you're attributing to me a position that I don't hold. And I mean, it's good that we finally found something that we can really disagree about. We had two responsibilities in this conversation. One was to find something that we could really disagree about, and the other is that I shouldn't talk as much. And I failed on the second. I concede that I failed on the second. But okay.
No, we're doing fine.
But we're doing okay. On the first, at least, we're doing okay. And there are two ways. One is that it's opportunity, not influence. And the other thing is that I'm not saying that the only thing that matters in the design of the political system or the electoral system is equal opportunity for political influence. What I'm saying is that it's a fundamental constitutional value. And so what you're looking to do when you're figuring out, for example, how to regulate campaign finance, you got to make a collective decision about the expenditure of money. There are going to be laws. What are the political values that should guide your judgment about that? One fundamental political value is freedom of speech.
Yes.
That absolutely. What I'm saying is that another consideration that should enter into the law and policy in this area is this value of equal opportunity for political influence. That is, you're looking to design a democracy. And then what you're trying to do is to accommodate both of those things.
And I would say
what the court has said since Buckley is the second one doesn't matter.
Yeah, and I would say it doesn't matter because there's no way to operationalize it in a coherent way. I think that the real life, as opposed to what the abstract ideas we're batting about, the real life impetus behind campaign finance regulation has been that historically Republicans had the money-raising advantage, and so it looked like unregulated role of money in the political process favored one side over the other, and so there was a skew there. Of course, Democrats had compensating advantages, and we've worked out where we've not had a monopoly of power in either party, and so somehow or another we've had some kind of robust political competition over the years. So I think even back then the concerns were not terribly weighty. But now we've flipped entirely, and at least in this election cycle, Democrats have a huge fundraising advantage over Republicans, and with the advent of Internet campaign contributions, we've got this new way that's like direct mail to the 10th power, this new way of accessing small givers and giving that what you're looking for, true equal opportunity to participate through contributions in the political process in a way that had not existed before. And so I'm wondering if this is one of those issues that whatever you think about it in the abstract, that the real world things that have been driving it along seem to have gone off in a different direction. And I wonder how much enthusiasm there will be for campaign finance regulation in the future if the people who've historically thought they would profit by it no longer think they will. So maybe. Well,
I have proof from my own case that the concern about campaign finance reform isn't driven entirely by Democratic fundraising disadvantages. The proof is I'm still for campaign finance reform, even though I recognize that the Democrats are doing okay on raising money. I think it's an issue about democracy. No, it's not an issue about whether it's not an issue about Democrats and Republicans. I mean, there are lots of concerns about campaign finance schemes. You didn't mention another one. I think this is another really important one, which is about these being incumbency protection pacts. Absolutely, these things have to be scrutinized very carefully. It isn't really true that the changes in the technology of fundraising have really leveled the playing field in terms of fundraising. It's still true that bigger donors get more attention both on the candidate side and on the organizational side. They give the most money. That's where most of the money comes from. They're the ones who get most of the attention. It's also true that if you look at other kinds of political activities, like joining an organization, showing up for a rally, going to a meeting, all other political activities, whether you do them or not is best predicted by whether you're interested in them or not.
Right.
The one thing where that's not true is providing money. What predicts whether you provide money or not is whether you have money, not whether you're interested in politics. So interest in politics doesn't predict giving money. Interest in politics does predict whether you show up at a meeting or not. So I think there really is there's a skew in
I'm not sure.
Candidates go out.
Aren't people who are giving money, if you've got two people with equal amount of money, aren't the people who are giving more interested in politics than the people who aren't? So at every income level, it is a reflection of interest in politics, isn't it?
Yes, it's true that if you hold income fixed, then people with the same level of income, whether they give or not give, depends on their interest in politics. It's true, though, that in the case of, say, going to a meeting, whether you go to a meeting or not doesn't depend on your income level.
Okay, so what is the newspapers' endorsements of candidates? How does that fit into an equal opportunity world? What opportunity does any private citizen have to match that megaphone? And how does their interest enable them to equal that megaphone?
It may be that that there's no it may be that there's no way to equalize even the chances for influence. The point is,
well, I mean, one way is to get together. One way is to get together, pull your money,
something,
and buy an ad that endorses the other guy. But if you foreclose that, then or put limits on it, then I think you
haven't foreclosed that even for anybody. But what you've said, this regulation was specifically about corporations, and it's specifically about taking money from their treasury. It says if you want to do this thing, you got to set up a segregated fund. What you can't do. So part of the rationale for the concerns about corporations is the reason that corporations are able to have the kinds of treasuries that they have is because you have a tax and policy system that's set up to enable them to accumulate lots of resources in order to play an economic function. So there was a particular concern. Part of the concern about corporations giving comes from the fact that they're given they have all kinds of state conferred advantages.
I mean, in this case, though, we're talking about a 501c3 corporation, I believe. So anyway,
a 501c3 absolutely. The Wisconsin Right to Life is not a for-profit corporation, right. But it is an important fact that a substantial part of their general treasury did come from for-profit corporations. And so if you wanted to say that it's perfectly okay for a 501c3 to give from its general treasury, so long as it doesn't accept general treasury income from for-profit, well, that's another kind of regulatory scheme that would try to respect the value of equal opportunity for political influence. But I suspect that you're against that one too.
Yeah. Well, yeah, and since my side won this one, I'm going to just let you have the last word here. And we've reached an hour mark here, and I think we both got things we've got to go off and do. But
good.
I enjoyed chatting with you, and even disagreeing with you, and we'll find other things to agree and disagree about down the line.
Very good. Have a good rest of the day, Brink.
Okay,
nice
you too. Bye-bye.